Regards from Pittsburgh, Squirrel Hill to be exact. Here now for a simple wedding from two wonderful families from our community, and they married into a family from Pittsburgh. So here I am, sitting in glorious Squirrel Hill. For those of you who've never been here, it's a beautiful community. My daughter Basi and Chesky live here, and my son-in-law and my grandchildren. So it was a win-win. And of course, we don't shirk from our responsibilities of doing our classes, and so we're going to have our Shaar Habitachon class right here in Squirrel Hill. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Hope you're having a beautiful day so far. And we're going to start off today with saying Tehillim for a dear friend, Zalman. Sorry for that. And so we're going to say Tehillim now, chapter 20. And please, if you have anyone that you need for us to say Tehillim for today, feel free to add their name here on our group. L'hamratzeach mizmor leDavid, Yancha Adonai b'yom tzara, Yisagefcha Shem Elehei Yaakov. Yishlach Ezracha mikodesh u'metzin Yisadeka, Yiskar kol mechasecha v'loscha yidash nesela. Yiten lecha chavavecha v'chol atzascha yimalei, Rana b'shuasecha u'v'shem Eloheinu nidgol. Yimalei Adonai kol mashalasecha. Ati yadati ki yoshi Adonai Mashicho, Yaneu mishmei kocher b'gvuros yesha yimino. Ela v'recha ve'ela v'sosa manachnu b'shem Adonai, Eloheinu naskir. Hema karu v'nafala v'anachnu kamnu v'nisadad. Adonai Hoshia HaMelech Yanenu v'yom karenu. For everyone who needs a refuah shalema, for everyone who needs only Basuras Tovas, Leah Baspasya, Zalman Yitzchak Ben Hesia, everyone should have only good news to share. And let's get right into it. So, we keep learning in Shaar Habitachon, and for those of you who have been on this journey with me, you'll know that I see everything in the world as a hand of Hashem. Signs, all the beauty, and even the bumps, I really attribute to Hashem's presence in my life. And specifically when things are maybe challenging, I always say to myself, just have trust in Hashem, breathe in bitachon, exhale anxiety, and allow Hashem's presence to take away your anxiety, because anxiety never helps anyone. And for those people who feel like I'm a realist, anxiety still doesn't help you. Anxiety has nothing to do with real life, with reality. Anxiety has nothing to do with a better outcome. In fact, it's the opposite, because what you give out to the universe is what you get back. Like attracts like. And this Shabbos was an incredible story in Parshas Baloscha. And I want to share with you a fascinating, real story, contemporary story that actually happened not too long ago. But first with the Parsha. So we hear that the Parshas Baloscha tells us that Miriam and Aaron were having a conversation about the brother Moshe, and they spoke about Moshe in maybe a little bit of degrading manner, which is also called what? Lashon hara. As a result, Miriam was stricken with leprosy, and she had to be quarantined for 7 days. Now, let me just give you a little background of this quarantining. By the way, all of us today, I remember learning the Parsha and hearing about quarantining, and I had no clue what that meant until now, 2022, and suddenly quarantining is a real part of life. And that means being ostracized, out of the way, in a room in your house, avoiding people, no contact with any other humans. It's not a very comfortable feeling. But what happened in the desert in those days was that if someone was stricken with leprosy, they actually had to quarantine outside of the camp. So the Jews were in the desert for 40 years, as we know, and they had to quarantine outside. Now, here's the challenge, okay? Rashi tells us, the commentary, the most foremost commentary on the Chumash tells us that the Jews gave a unique honor to Moshe, to Miriam, by doing what? By waiting for her for 7 days. In other words, they usually traveled, right? They would pick up their ark and the table, the shulchan, the Aron Kodesh. They would take it to the travelers that God showed them with all the Jews, 3 million Jews, and they would travel through. And when God told them to settle, they settled. When they blew the trumpets and the Jews continued. But now the Jews remained in their place for 7 days as an honor to Miriam. What was the honor? What did she do? Do you remember what honor? To anybody here that's online, what honor did Miriam do 8 decades earlier? Something fascinating. When Moses was a baby and he was put into the Nile because Pharaoh had made a terrible decree. What was the decree? That all Jewish babies will be thrown into the Nile. So Moshe was born, and his mother Miriam, his mother Yocheved, put him into a little basket, and she saved exactly. And she let him float into the Nile. Miriam was 7 years old. She waited at the edge of the river to see what would happen to her little brother. And because of that cure, the Jewish people waited for a week for her. So I have a few questions to ask you. First of all, I don't understand. The Jews wouldn't have waited? Yes, Kim, we just said Refuah Shlema to Zama Yitzchak ben Hesi. We just said Tehillim for him. It should all be B'suras Tovos. So I have a question. The Jews wouldn't have waited for Miriam 7 days? Really? That's what would have happened? She was going to wait alone in the desert? An 87-year-old woman would have waited alone in the desert? Is that something that the Jewish people would have done, guys? Does that sound? They gave her an honor, so they didn't leave? I don't understand. So Rashi says something fascinating. It's not like they would have left her for 7 days in the desert. What happened was, the rule was if you were in quarantine because you contracted leprosy for Lashon Hara. By the way, on a side note, I'm thinking how many of us would be stricken with leprosy on a regular day? Can you imagine if we had leprosy today in our days for talking Lashon Hara? That's a big, rude awakening here. But back to our story. If someone had leprosy, they would have to continue with the camp, with the traveling, and when they stopped and rested, then the person that had leprosy would have to be quarantined for 7 days and then rejoin the Jewish nation, which meant that you had to suffer with leprosy extra days or weeks until the Jews camped. But this was the miracle. Even though the Jews were ready to journey on, they stopped. They camped so that Miriam wouldn't have to struggle 1 more minute with leprosy. Now, in my opening remarks about today's class, I asked you, have you, anybody here watching, have you ever experienced the law of attraction? Which means what you give out, you get back in return. As King Solomon always says so eloquently, Kamayim hapanim el panim, that what you give out to the water is what the water reflects back to you. If what you give out to the world, kindness, generosity, empathy, compassion, that's what you get back. If you give out lashon hara, cynicism, cynical behavior, you give back, you give out anger, those kind of things, then that's what you're going to get back. So clearly, kamayim apanim is a reflection of you. What you give out to the world, water is what you get back. And that is with our relationships. That's the way it is with our family. That is with the way it is with people that we love and people that we don't love. What you give out is what you get back. Show me with some emojis how many of you have seen this in your life. I'm just curious. And if you want, you can even put it down in the chat. You know, what are some of the things that you've seen in your life that when you gave beautiful, kind, generous givings, that's what you got back? And sometimes you didn't. And you wonder, why did I deserve that? Well, it's a time of reflection. What did I give out? What behaviors did I give out? It's very telltaling, and it's a very important lesson. But let's get on. So what happened to Miriam? Why did she deserve 3 million people, 3 million people to wait for her while she had leprosy? What did she do to deserve this? So as I said, Talia says a very interesting scientific study that shows drops of water on the microscope positive %. Oh, I love that. Talia, thank you for sharing that. Wow. Incredible. I love when science backs up everything that Torah says. I love it. So what did Miriam do 8 decades earlier? She was a 7-year-old standing at the riverbank watching her little brother Moshe. Between me and you, my friends, if Moshe would have been swept away by the current, she was too young to swim after him. If he would have fallen into the water, she was too young to jump in and save him. So what was her standing there accomplishing? Well, as it happens to be, Batya, the princess of Egypt, was bathing in the water. She heard the cry of a baby, reaches out her arm, pulls the baby close, and says, "Here is a Jewish child." That's a whole conversation in itself. How did she know it was a Jewish child? What about that child reflected a Jewish soul? But that's not today's class. She sees the Jewish child, and immediately she sees the baby's crying. She hears the baby crying. So she says, "Let me give him to a wet nurse." And she immediately brings an Egyptian woman. But Moshe, my dear friends, was a tzaddik. He had a pure neshama from the moment he was born. He was going to be the one and only human to ever face God face to face, speak to God face to face, receive the Torah 40 days up in heaven, bring the luchos down to the Jewish nation. He couldn't have anything impure in his mouth. No bit of non-kosher stuff entered Moshe's mouth ever. So who's going to feed his baby? This is where Miriam comes in. Miriam hears the baby crying. She knows that he's not attaching himself to a wet nurse. She immediately makes a dash to the princess and says, "I know someone that can help this baby. He's a Jew. I know a Jewish nurse." And as you know, who does she go to call? Anybody? Kenny? She goes to get her mother. I have my little granddaughter sitting right here. Say hello. So she goes to call her mother. Because she was there at that moment, watching the entire, exactly, Talia, watching the entire conversation, the entire happening unfolding in front of her eyes, she sees that this baby is in a desperate situation. And so she runs to get Yocheved, his mother. The fact that she gets Yocheved immediately saves Moshe even an hour of crying. And that hour of crying, that compassion that she showed to Moshe 8 decades earlier, warranted for the entire Jewish nation to wait for her to alleviate her pain for 7 days. Do you see what I see, my friends? Even if no one's watching, what we give out to mankind, to others that are less fortunate, comes back to us. Sometimes someone calls you and you're not in the mood of speaking to them, you ignore the call. that's what we'll get back. Others will ignore us. But we pick up every nudniki call, and even people that we know just need things from us. But we answer their calls because we know that someone else might need us, and I am there for them. And guess what? When we're on the needy end, when we're on the receiving end, because everybody is needy at some point, then Hashem makes sure that we get back what we gave. I think this is a profound, profound lesson for us. But I want to share a contemporary story that just happened. Well, it was 1989, but for me, that's recently. Anybody else feel that way? So what's the story that happened in 1989? Fascinating story. And I'm going to share it with you. I told the story actually a little while ago in Shul. But I'm going to repeat it again because it fits into this story as well. There was a young IDF soldier by the name of Gadi Ramon. Gadi was traveling through a certain part of Israel when a Palestinian terrorist from Ramallah, Yamach Shemam, attacked him brutally and left him on the side of the road for dead. Gadi was bleeding to death, and Baruch Hashem, Min Hashemayim, comes along a young man by the name of Shlomo Bergman. And Shlomo Bergman notices a body. He sees something trauma. He jumps out of his car, lifts up the body, throws it in the back seat, and quickly whisks him off to hospital. Takes him to the emergency room. All the nurses, doctors come. Shlomo says goodbye. I'm not eating anymore. And he's off. Well, Baruch Hashem, he was saved just in the nick of time, and Gadi is brought back to life. Meanwhile, Gadi's parents were called to the hospital, and they want to know who was the angel that saved our son. But no one in the hospital took down Shlomo's name. No one in the hospital even asked him who he was, because they were dealing with life and death. There wasn't time to find out who this young hero was. He was just whisked off into the emergency, and Shlomo slipped out. No one saw. No one was watching. Shlomo didn't do it to get any thank yous or accolades. He just did it to save a Jewish life. And so Shlomo's, Gadi's parents, desperate to find out who was this angel. Can we find him? Can we reward him? So Gadi's parents own a grocery store in Ashdod. And so they put up signs in the entrance of the store, all over the store. If you know anyone that this in this date saved a Jewish man from death, and this in this place, and this in this hospital, please give us the information. But nobody came forward until a few months later, and a woman by the name of Anat Bergman shows up. She happened to be visiting somebody in Ashdod and walks into the grocery store. She sees the sign and she says, that sounds like my Shlomo story. So she says to the woman, is it possible that this happened in this time? Because my son told us how he had picked up an IDF soldier who was nearly bleeding to death, and it sounds like this was my son. So these two mothers hug, they embrace, they cry, and then Shlomo's mom, Anat Bergman, looks at the storekeepers or the store owner, Mrs. Ramon, and she goes, do you recognize me? And the lady goes, I don't. She goes, think back 20 years ago. Look at me. Do you recognize me from 20 years ago? She goes, I don't. She goes, well, let me tell you. 20 years ago, I was a young woman. I was expecting. And I was very, very down. I had no means to support this child. I was a newlywed, and I didn't know what to do. And I came in very, very down. And you and your husband approached me and gently said, what's the matter? And I told him I was in a terrible crisis. I didn't know what to do with this pregnancy. I was desperate. I didn't think I could actually have the child. I had no means, mentally, emotionally, physically, financially. And you and your husband convinced me to have this baby and that you would give me free groceries as long as I needed. I actually did move out of Ashdod before I even gave birth. But the child I gave birth to because of you, his name was Shlomo. And this is the boy that saved your son's life. Do you see it, my friends? Kamayim hapanim apanim. What you give out to the universe, you get back. There's two very important lessons that I really need to reach out today. First, when we give out to others, whether it's kindness, compassion, charity, a smile, a listening ear, the world is missing that. Everyone is so busy. Everyone's sitting on their phones all the time, not even noticing. I travel a lot. I'm sitting in airports. Nobody picks up their eyes to look at the person sitting next to them. Nobody. What has become of our generation? I mean, it's ironic. I'm giving a class now on a phone. But I can guarantee you, as soon as I finish the class, this phone is turned off. We can't keep our face into electronics and into social media. We have to keep our eyes open and look out to the universe and see who needs my help, who needs a smile, who needs a phone call, who needs assistance. We are so consumed with ourselves. And even just being consumed with yourself and your family, that's being all-consuming. We have to reach a little bit more than just our own families. We can't just be there for ourselves. We have a large Jewish community that needs us. The world needs us. Yes, Arlene, always be nice to others. You never know who will be there for you. And we're all going to need help at some time. Let's not be in denial. But more than that, this beautiful message of Miriam, she heard a baby cry. Do we understand the value of a Jewish child? That the cry of a child is so deep, not to let a baby cry unnecessarily. Do you know the story is told of the Alter Rebbe when he lived upstairs from his son's home, the Mittler Rebbe, and in that home lived his grandchild. One day his grandchild was crying, but the Mittler Rebbe was so engrossed in his learning, he didn't hear the baby cry, and the Alter Rebbe came down 2 flights to lift up the baby and to comfort him. And he said to his son, when a child cries, never be too involved in something else so that you ignore the cry of a child. And this doesn't only mean a physical cry. It means the cry of a child that could be 15 years old, a child that is 20, a child at any age that is crying out, listen to me, hear me, give me words of validation, give me words of empathy, give me kindness. Giving a teenager a helping hand, a listening ear, a comforting shoulder. That is who we are, a nation of Rachmanim, right? The 3 signs of a Jew. Rachmanim, Baishanim, and Gomle Chasadim. Rachmanim, merciful people. Baishanim, bashful people. And Gomle Chasadim, kind people. Those are the 3 signs of a Jew. And if there's someone that's missing those signs, it's a question of their Jewishness. Yes, indeed, that is the sign of a Jew. And that is what Miriam has been teaching us. And that is why the Jewish people waited 7 days. This unique honor for Miriam because she showed compassion to her brother. Have a beautiful, glorious, compassionate day. Best regards from Squirrel Hill. Say goodbye for my gorgeous darlings. Take care.